Hi, my name is Jack. 2 months ago, I did a 10-day silent meditation retreat. It was in Herefordshire, in the west of England, and it was an incredible experience. And I decided if I still felt as strongly as I did at the time I finished the course, 2 months into the future, I would record a video and share some of my insights about the experience. Um, so yeah, here I am. First and foremost, I would like to say I intend to make a very objective video here. There's a lot of misinformation and kind of a lack of clarity about what to expect from an experience like this, and in particular from a Vipassana 10-day retreat. So I wanted to kind of give some insights about what you can expect if you're considering it yourself. And I will say up front, it was a phenomenal experience. It changed the way I look at the world and the way I kind of manage my relationship with myself and with others as well, of course. So I really did enjoy it, and perhaps I'll do another video in the future where I deep dive into kind of my personal experiences. But here I kind of wanted to give an overview of what to expect at the retreat. So first and foremost, I went to a Vipassana retreat. What is Vipassana? It's not the name of a specific kind of sect or organization. It's actually just the name for a type of meditation, which originally kind of derived from Buddhism. It's an ancient technique, and it was popularized in recent times by this this kind of spiritual guru teacher called S.N. Goenka, who there's 300 centers worldwide in his name, essentially. Upon leaving the retreat, I filled out a book, and I wanted to kind of know as much as possible about the experience. And this is about kind of 30 pages, which I jotted down in the days following the retreat as well, trying to recall as much as possible. And I've kind of written an overview here of everything I kind of experienced day to day, and the kind of more general things as well, which I'll discuss now. But yes, SM Goenka's Vipassana, 300 centers worldwide. The most common question and my biggest concern going in was, is it a cult? And to be upfront, the answer is a resounding no. However, there are absolutely kind of cultish elements, and I can understand why people would interpret it that way. But the kind of typical elements of a cult, which I would define as kind of ensuring you stay involved, you stay committed, you're kind of giving financial commitments, etc., etc. There's none of that. I mean, some interesting things is that you're only allowed to donate if, and they run fully on donations. Actually, attending is free. There's no cost associated with it, but they do, of course, ask for donations on the last day. And they ask for kind of, give what you can. There's no pressure. The average donation in the UK is actually £200, which I thought was lower than I expected, to be quite honest. But again, there's no pressure to donate. There's no expectation for you to ever return. And ultimately, the kind of teaching at the end of the day is that you are your own God, I suppose, in a way, where you set your own path in life. You're not committed or reliant on anyone or anything else. But yeah, I just wanted to address that up front. So I'm going to start with the very first day and kind of go through with what you can expect day by day. So although it's a 10-day retreat, technically, it's technically 12 days rather, because there's an arrival day and a leaving day at either end, and there's 10 full days that you spend there. So you arrive, and I believe this is the same case globally for all retreats. I could be mistaken, but from my understanding, generally the timetable and the schedule and kind of generally the teachings as a whole are pretty much the same globally across every single retreat worldwide. So first and foremost, so the arrival day, let's call it day 0, was a Wednesday, and then you stay until the following Sunday. So as I said, 12 days in total. Generally, centers are remote enough to be away from the distractions of a city, however, still accessible through transport links and public transport links. And I kind of learned that that's kind of the case globally as well. So that's something worth bearing in mind. It did feel quite remote. I had never been to Herefordshire myself, but yeah, it wasn't too inaccessible. It was about, I'd say, a 40-minute drive from Gloucester. So myself, I live in London. I got the train to Gloucester, and then there's actually a coach service that runs to the camp, which quite a large amount of people actually ended up taking. But yeah, I took that coach myself. I think it was about £20 more or less. And there's also, if you prefer, there's a rideshare board actually where you can either request or offer a ride to the centres, which is pretty handy, and it seems like a lot of people do that. I can imagine some people are cautious, and I definitely would have been about taking a rideshare there because I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what it would be like. I didn't know what the people would be like, etc. However, I noticed on the last day you can again request a rideshare from the centre, and then at that point people are obviously a little bit more comfortable, so more people were getting ride shares on their return trips. So that was very helpful. I would say, so kind of discussing my arrival day in particular and what to expect. When I took the coach service myself, going to Dhamma Dipa, there was actually quite a large number of people waiting at the coach waiting point. And I was pleasantly surprised about the diversity of people there, all kind of ages, races, an even split of gender. Yeah, it was super diverse, and I chatted with a few people and was just very pleased to see everyone was normal. I didn't have any kind of specific expectation in mind of who would be there or what the typical visitor would look like, but truly it was super diverse. People of every background, even coming from kind of very varied careers and parts of the country, and quite a few international people as well. It was just super, super nice, actually. And that was a big relief as well. Okay, so we kind of took this coach to the camp. There was a little bit of a wait, but not too bad. And I believe we arrived at about probably 4:30-ish. And at arrival, there's kind of a registration where everyone queues up, and you essentially kind of rehash the details you shared at your time of application, as well as a few other details about kind of what to expect specifically at the camp, and it's a time for you to answer any questions. At that point, you're speaking with one of the course managers, and essentially every remit, every course, at least at Dhamma Dipa, from my understanding, has two course managers. These are people you can go to if you have any issues while at the course on the ground, any issues with housing, accommodation, etc., and just kind of any general support as well if you need it. It is a silent retreat, and I never spoke to another student the whole time I was there. However, you can speak to the managers, and of course you can speak to the teachers as well if needed. So it's not super strictly enforced. It's not like you're going to get in trouble if you're caught speaking. But generally, when I was there, at least, everyone followed those rules. I didn't witness anyone speaking to each other. So that was good, because I do think that kind of true commitment is quite beneficial. So yeah, at the time of arriving, after doing that registration, you're assigned a bed and your room, of course, and then you're also assigned a seat in the meditation hall, actually. The meditation hall, as you can imagine, super large. Every single person at the retreat will be in there meditating at key times during the day. Sometimes they're optional, sometimes you're expected to be in there, but I'll go into that in more detail shortly. So yeah, at that time of arrival, it's not immediate silence. It's not like you go into the center and instantly you can't speak. There is a period until roughly 7 p.m. You can speak. And as I discussed, I arrived at about 4:30. So I had a couple of hours of chatting with people, which was really nice. I could speak with some of the old students as well. And the old students are defined as people that have just completed a previous course. So that was super helpful, and I got kind of some good advice there. And that's definitely something I would recommend anyone else attending does as well, because it really did put my mind at ease. There was one guy I spoke to who had attended once before a few years prior, and he personally, I went in with no expectation of anything. I thought, at a minimum, I'm enjoying, some nice peace in the countryside, having some time off work. That's kind of all I expected from it. I didn't expect to get out anything from the experience necessarily. I think that's definitely the correct expectation to go in with, in my opinion. Um, but this guy I spoke to said he just felt a little bit kind of lighter after coming out, and just slightly happier, and kind of he gave me this kind of he made this point that if you come out of the course and you just feel 1% better in life, you enjoy life 1% more, you feel 1% more motivated, that makes the entire thing worth it. That 1% makes everything worth it, which I thought was a really wonderful thought, and that's something I did end up carrying throughout. And I can say I by the end I definitely got on a lot more than just 1%. So yeah, that was pretty fantastic. So yeah, on arrival day, there is a light meal served. In our case, it was some kind of pea soup and some freshly baked bread. I'll go into more details on the food, of course, in a little while. Um, After eating, I believe I went to go and kind of set up my bedroom. Um, Generally, at Vipassana retreats, you're either alone in a bedroom or sharing with one other person. That's the kind of norm globally. However, in my case, I was pretty surprised because I was put into a dorm room, which was shared with, I believe it was about eight beds. I'll put a photo on screen now, but it was essentially kind of a converted barn, and we were in this attic room, and I had this kind of little concealed bed, which I kind of had a cloth wall around me, so you could hear everyone. You could hear everyone snoring, so it wasn't ideal for a restful night's sleep, really. But that is definitely an outlier. I'd never actually heard of any other experiences like that when I was researching online. And from my understanding, that dorm is typically reserved for people 25 and under, which I don't fall into that bracket. But I was definitely, I suppose, on the younger side there, so they kind of included me within that as well. Um, but yeah, that was definitely an interesting experience in itself. So I wanted to speak a little bit about the grounds of Dhamma Dipa specifically. There's a few different, I believe there's two other centres in the UK. The other main one is, I won't even try and pronounce, but it's in Suffolk. And I chose Dhamma Dipa because from my research, it's the nicer of the two centres. It's recently been kind of regenerated. They're having a major project done. They had some really nice new rooms that had been built in the past few years, where some of them actually had disabled access even, I believe, which was really good to see, because obviously it improves accessibility for others to have the same experience. And those rooms also had ensuite bathrooms as well, which was really nice. In my case, and in the case of maybe about half of the other men there with me, we all shared a what would you call it, a shower room, basically a shared bathroom where there were 5 different showers, a load of sinks, and it wasn't too bad, to be honest. There was never a situation where I had to wait for a shower, really. Just one time comes to mind generally, because you can kind of stagger when you kind of go and shower throughout the day. There's always going to be a time when you can go and it'll be, you're going to be the only one in there, more or less. So that's pretty nice. The grounds itself is actually a old equestrian centre which the foundation bought. So as I said, my room was a barn, A few of the other rooms were converted stables. There was an old farmhouse. It was quite cool, actually. It was super nice. And yeah, all the rooms that I saw, I kind of poked my head into a few of them as well. They were all pretty solid. I mean, definitely better than a standard kind of camping experience. They all had radiators in them. From what I had seen, they were quite warm and toasty, actually. I attended in May, and part of that was because I felt like the weather would be nice that time of year, not too hot, not too cold. I was quite unlucky because it did end up being quite a chilly period, and it was quite stormy as well. So that was definitely an interesting experience. However, ultimately, I was kind of relieved about that kind of weather, to be quite honest. Um, so this is the same for every Vipassana location, but the grounds is split into men on one side, women on one side. You can interact during those few hours on the first day. However, after that, they essentially uh, put a divider through the dining hall and split us off completely. The grounds were entirely separated, where there was essentially just the way it was constructed. There were buildings in the way separating the men's side from the women's side, and the men and women only saw each other when in the dining hall, essentially. Sorry, in the meditation hall. There's also at Dhamma Dipa, there's a beautiful woodland, which is really lovely. It's not this one that I'm in now, of course. This is my local forest, but there is a small woodland at the back of the grounds behind the meditation centre. Um, and I'll make sure to include a video of that at some point in this. But it was really stunningly beautiful little forest, all kinds of animals there and beautiful trees, and it was just really, really lovely. Rabbits and mice, and someone told me they saw a badger. There were all sorts there, and it just made a really nice location to go for a little break during the day. I spent a lot of time just walking around there. The woodland itself is quite small. You could kind of do a circle of it in about 5 minutes. However, there were kind of benches potted throughout. There was a beautiful uh, green in the middle of it as well, where there was a kind of a bench under a tree, which I remember, and that was a really peaceful little spot. Sometimes at kind of lunchtime, you'd see people kind of go into that green and just lying down and enjoying the little bit of the sun that we had. But yeah, that was a really enjoyable part of the grounds, and generally a really enjoyable part of the day going in there. I think that covers the grounds more or less. The last thing to discuss is the meditation hall itself. Um, Generally, at Dhamma Dipa, I can't testify for other courses, but it's a total kind of course remit of about 120 students, I believe, which was more than I expected, to be quite honest. Um, and obviously, everyone fits in the meditation hall. You obviously have the course managers as well, and then you actually sometimes other people come in just for a singular meditation session, or maybe just for one day, and those are generally kind of local people, so they're allowed to kind of attend and come and go as they please, which I thought was quite interesting, and it's quite nice, and it was a light form of entertainment to kind of notice these new people coming in and kind of wonder about who they were. So as I mentioned before, everyone is assigned a seat in the meditation hall, which I call it a seat. It was a blue mat, basically. And at the back of the hall, there are loads and loads of these blue cushions of all kind of different shapes and sizes. And obviously, the purpose for them was to get as comfortable as possible. There were blankets as well. So there were kind of cushions like this size, and then also kind of smaller ones. And I would essentially assemble them in a certain way to kind of support my legs while I'm sitting cross-legged. And yeah, you can kind of just mess around with those. I think it's probably everyone had a slightly different favored seating position. There's different ways you can sit, of course. Lotus position if you can do it, but it's very uncomfortable in reality. So the vast majority of people did just sit standard cross-legged. You can also ask for kind of a little meditation stool, which they had plenty of those. And you could also request a chair if you needed to as well, which I saw quite a few people using those. And as kind of days went by, more and more people started using the meditation stools and the chairs as well. So you can request for one of them if you're feeling uncomfortable. But yeah, the meditation hall is actually where the course commences. So at 7 p.m. on day 0, you go into that hall and it begins. It starts with a video recording, I believe, of S.N. Goenka, who is the teacher. It was a bit of a plot twist, I suppose, but S.N. Goenka is the teacher, but he actually died in, I believe it's 2014, so more than a decade ago now. And all the teachings are actually video recordings or audio recordings of him. He is the teacher, and there's also an assistant teacher for both the men and the women as well. And they're always sat in the hall on either side of this big screen where Goenka is during his teachings. This is something which I consider to be a bit culty, and this is kind of the most culty it gets. There are a few rules regarding this, like you're not allowed to point your feet forwards in the hall towards where he's being projected, which again, it made me slightly uncomfortable. And there's this other thing that happens where there's kind of chanting as well, not in too creepy of a way. It's kind of peaceful actually in reality, where the teacher will chant at the kind of end of meditation sessions, and it's kind of a warning, I suppose, that the meditation session is coming to an end. And it usually goes on for 5 to 10 minutes actually. And you're not expected to, no one chants along. It's just an audio recording. And sometimes, I can't remember the exact word, apologies, or its meaning, but there's kind of an affirmation you can speak at the end of the chanting, sorry, which some people in the hall did say. It was just one word repeated 3 times. But yeah, there's no pressure, or I wasn't doing it, and the majority of people weren't. So yeah, it's not too bad. But yeah, Goenka's teachings, those videos that I discussed today, are 30 years old actually, so they're pretty old, and those same recordings are played at all centers worldwide. So it's completely standardized. It's also worth mentioning that the same schedule is across all centers as well, which I will go into in a moment. I will discuss the schedule in more detail. But yeah, at this point, the rules are introduced essentially. The noble rules. I call them rules, but they're mostly kind of common sense, to be quite honest. The notable one though, of course, is the noble silence, and that's that you're not allowed to speak to other students. As I mentioned before, you can speak to the course managers, you can speak to the assistant teachers if you like, but yeah, you're expected not to speak on the grounds, and there was never a time I saw people speaking actually. So yeah, that wasn't necessarily hard to uphold. You're also not allowed to communicate in any way with students, and that's worth noting as well, including even eye contact, which sounds insane, and you do kind of adjust to it over time, but that was definitely kind of somewhat intense. It's even slightly awkward holding, like if you're walking through a door, like holding it for someone to go through, or kind of letting them go through and stuff like that, because obviously you're not meant to communicate in any way. So that was a little bit rigid, I suppose, to that end. But you adjusted to it quite quickly. So going into kind of the daily schedule, this was a bit of a shock for me, but every day you are waking up at 4 a.m. That's when the wake up call is, and the wake up is quite nice. Older students walk around with a gong, essentially. They walk around the grounds, and I would often wake up from hearing it quite far in the distance, and then it would come closer, and then they'll do it kind of right outside your window, basically, as well. And it was a pretty peaceful way to wake up, to be honest. I did also have a Casio watch with me, um, which was super helpful because I could set my own alarms. Also, if I took a nap during the day, which I did on a couple of occasions, and is encouraged actually, is helpful for that, of course. So I definitely recommend bringing a Casio watch if you have one, or an alarm clock. At Dhamma Dipa in particular, they did actually offer alarm clocks to people if you wanted one. They had a big box of them at arrival, and a few other kind of things as well. They also had a little shop where you could buy like toothpaste and other things if you had forgotten those. So that was helpful. um, but yeah, I will also say the daily schedule also varies on 2 days in particular, day 4 and day 10. Um, it's not a dramatic change. It's a slight change, but I just thought it's worth noting. And I'm not going to go into the details because I would kind of, it sounds silly, but I think it's helpful to go in blind to those things so you have no preconceived notion of what's coming. Um, I definitely wouldn't have wanted to know how those days go. It's not anything kind of scary or anything like that. But just because of the way the meditation technique develops and how the days go, I'm glad I didn't know how those days went. But again, it's not a dramatic change or anything. So when you actually arrive at the center, they give you this little pamphlet, which, of course, you're not allowed reading materials there. You're not even allowed kind of a notepad or anything like that. So I read through this quite a few times, and here it kind of discusses the kind of fundamentals of the technique, of the center, and then the code of discipline as well. And those kind of rules that I mentioned, first, obviously, noble silence, but then kind of abstain from killing, which obviously isn't particularly difficult, but that does include bugs as well. And by extension, all food at the center is vegetarian slash vegan, um, which, I don't think it should be difficult for anyone to adjust to eating vegetarian. And the food was actually really delicious, and I'll go into a little bit more detail shortly. But abstain from killing, abstain from stealing, abstaining from sexual activity, abstaining from telling lies, and abstaining from intoxicants. So, yeah, pretty straightforward stuff. Yeah, you're not allowed to smoke, as you may expect. And I did speak to a few people at the end of the course that they were smokers going in, but they felt no need to smoke by the end of the course, which I thought was really interesting. Um, but yeah, I read through this pamphlet quite a few times. And on the back, there's the course timetable. And again, this is the same at all centers. And I'm going to speak through this briefly now. So at 4 a.m. was the wake up bell. And then at 4:30, the kind of day officially begins, where you're meditating either in the hall or in your room. The majority of people did go to the hall during this period. There is obviously the danger if you stay in your room, you're just going to go back to sleep. I did do that on a couple of days. In my kind of dorm room, there were quite a few people that would just go back to sleep. And I did find it a little bit irritating, to be quite honest, because I feel like you may as well commit yourself fully to the experience. But then again, I'm a hypocrite, so what can I say? But yeah, 4:30 to 6:30 is meditate in your hall or the room. And these meditations are unguided as well, generally. Um, this does kind of vary slightly, but yeah, generally it's you go in, it's completely silent, everyone starts coming in, and yeah, it's just completely silent meditation. At 6:30 till 8 is the breakfast break. That's an hour and a half. I will clarify because this was a little bit confusing. Although that there's an hour and a half period for the breakfast break, breakfast is actually only the first 45 minutes, maybe only 30 minutes. 30, 45 minutes of that break period. So you can only be in the dining hall for that specific time. After that, you get gently ushered out, basically. Breakfast itself, I will go into shortly, and I'll explain kind of lunch as well afterwards. So yeah, that's 6:30 till 8. 8 till 9 is a group meditation in the hall. Now there's three kind of dedicated, let's say, meditation periods a day. 3 1-hour slots, and this is the first of them. During these periods, everyone is expected to be in the hall. You're not really allowed to be in your room unless, I don't know, you were feeling unwell or something. And yeah, that is quite a nice period because once everyone is there, I do find it easier to meditate when everyone else is around, actually. So yeah, that's 8 till 9, and then 9 till 11 is meditate in the hall or your room, but then it caveats according to the teacher's instructions. So often at the end of that period, 8 to 9, the teacher would introduce a new kind of technique, and they'd ask you to start practicing that as a replacement for what you've been doing already. So yeah, occasionally in that period as well, there would be a kind of, I don't even know what to call it, like a group study session almost, where at the end of that 8 to 9 period, one of the assistant teachers would announce, can all the new male students stay in the hall? And the other students can either go back to their room or stay in the hall. And for those kind of new male students, they would call us to the front, about kind of 8 of us at a time. And then the assistant teacher would speak to each of us and see how we're getting on with the technique, if we need any advice or guidance. And that was quite helpful because it was the only time you would really directly hear other people, other students speaking, and he would direct a question to each of us and we'd all each answer, and we could kind of hear about the similar struggles the other students were having. So that was quite beneficial, actually, and I did quite enjoy that. And that happened probably on about 4 or 5 occasions throughout the course. So yeah, that's 9 till 11. And then 11 to 12 is the lunch break. Well, technically from 11 to 1, but I'll explain in a second. So again, 11 to 12, lunch break. And I believe lunch is 45 minutes long. And then, yeah, the food was delicious, but I'll go into full detail in that shortly. Then from 1, so 11 to 12, lunch, and then 12 to 1, rest continues. But in this period, you can also have interviews, as they call them, with the teacher. So you can go and speak to the assistant teachers during this period. Don't mind the wind. Yeah, and that was obviously super helpful. I tried to push myself to go and see the teacher as much as possible, just because I felt it was the way to kind of get the most out of the experience. And the way it works is you kind of wait in the lobby of the meditation hall, and everyone writes your name down if you want to go and speak to the teacher, and then you'd wait with all the others, and everyone will get called in one at a time. That was obviously separate for the men's side and the women's side. I will say, speaking very honestly, I did not find speaking with the assistant teacher very helpful. He would generally, lovely guy, clearly a deep empath. He would remember the smallest things I had told him in previous days. And it was, out of anything, it was just comforting to speak with him, to be quite honest. However, when I came with very specific questions, the answers were generally generic, pretty much every single time. And the other people I spoke to had a similar experience to that. I think they kind of turn the questions back on you a lot of the time, and they don't want to overly influence things. They want to closely follow Goenka's teaching. So yeah, although I did find it beneficial, it wasn't massively so, to be quite honest. So yeah, that was 12 to 1. And then 1 to 2:30, again, meditate in the hall or your room. And then 2:30 to 3:30 is the second kind of required group meditation in the hall of the day. Then 3:30 to 5 p.m. again is meditate in your hall or according to the teacher's instructions. Again, things might change slightly during that period. Now, 5 to 6 is the tea break. Now, it's important I mention here that lunch is actually the last meal served of the day. That's at 11 a.m. The 5 p.m. tea break is just tea, which, to be fair, there is a good selection of, but just tea. And then you can, as a new student, you can have 2 pieces of fruit, which obviously is quite restrictive. Yeah, it was, to be quite honest, it was never a difficulty for me because you're so docile, I suppose, during the day. You're not allowed to do any kind of physical activity, particularly, and because your body is in a state of rest when you're meditating, you don't really feel hungry generally. So yeah, I never really struggled with hunger my whole time there. And the evening tea break, although it sounded scary at first, it was completely fine. Interestingly, old students, if you're returning for a second time, third, fourth, whatever it may be, you're not allowed the fruit in the evening. Instead, you have this lemon water, which only the old students could have, which was interesting. Also worth caveating, if you do have dietary requirements, you are allowed to, they will accommodate you, essentially. So there were some people that would have a little meal in the evening, for, whatever their reasons may have been. So yeah, 5 to 6 tea break. And it's worth noting, you can kind of shower during any of these break periods. So there's quite a few opportunities during the day where you can go and do that. Group meditation in the hall, 6 till 7, and this is the last of those kind of required meditation periods, the third one. After that group meditation, 6 to 7, at 7 to 8:15, it's the teacher's discourse in the hall. So this is the video recording, which, to be quite honest, was probably the highlight of the day most days. The teacher, Goenka, you can look up videos of him online. He's a very charismatic guy, and he tells really enthralling stories, to be quite honest. And yeah, it's very entertaining, very funny, some of the time anyway. And yeah, I learned a lot during those sessions, to be quite honest. And it's surprising how timeless they are, considering they're 30 years old. But yeah, they do really feel new and modern. I wasn't super knowledgeable about meditation going in. There were quite a few people I spoke to that had never done any meditation really. But I knew kind of bits and pieces, probably more than most, I would imagine. And despite that, I still learned a significant amount more there. So that was really good. But yeah, that was the teacher's discourse every evening. And then 8:15 till 9 p.m. was a kind of final, kind of brief 45-minute meditation in the hall. They would give you a break, 5-minute break in between. You would get 5-minute breaks during some meditation sessions. It wasn't like super harsh generally. It was nowhere near as strict as I would say, as I expected. But yeah, group meditation 8:15 till 9, and that was generally practicing what he had mentioned in that evening discourse. Then 9 till 9:30 was a second kind of question time for the teachers. You could stay in the hall if you wanted, and then you could go up one by one and ask the teacher questions. I thought this was going to be like a public forum Q&A, but it wasn't. You would go up and speak quietly about your questions or concerns. And yeah, that was 9 till 9:30, and then 9:30 p.m. is retire to your room, lights out. So that's the end of the day. For me anyway, returning to my room at 9:30, going to bed at about 10, and then waking up at 4. That's obviously 6 hours sleep. That's less than I would usually get. I typically sleep for about 8 hours. However, I didn't really feel tired particularly there. Um, and I think just your lifestyle when you're there does accommodate that. It was never, yeah, a hurdle for me particularly. But yeah, that's the end of the timetable. Um, it was a bit of a shock when I first saw it, but you do adjust to it quite quickly. Um, so, what most people will be curious about, food. Um, so the food is genuinely really tasty, and I'll go into everything in a second. But just a few notes first. So everything is homemade. Um, the lunches anyway, and the lunch meal varies day to day. It was kind of a buffet style um, meal essentially, where you'd line up for the dining hall, and we would kind of filter in slowly, and then there was this big kind of center table where people would go along with their plate, and you'd scoop on whatever you want. For lunch, generally, uh, very varied. There were kind of different stews and curries, uh, pasta on a couple of different days, kind of jacket potato. Um, there was always a salad option available. There was some like rye bread. There was a section of kind of nuts and seeds you could have. Um, yeah, it was pretty good. And throughout the day, there was a tea and coffee selection. So, a variety of herbal teas, obviously your typical English breakfast tea, and then coffee as well, and a few other kind of bits and pieces too. Um, but yeah, I'll put the full kind of lunch menu on screen now, because I kind of managed to recall all of it, because at the end of the day, I would always think about what was for lunch. And it was a bit of a struggle remembering everything, but I got there in the end. Um, for breakfast, it was the same every day. It was like a continental style deal, as you would imagine. There was a big kind of vat of oats when you first went in, but there was toast. There was uh, a variety of different cereals. There was yogurt, jams, Nutella, peanut butter. Um, yeah, everything you could want. There's something there for everyone, and I felt the same way about kind of the lunches as well. Is that it didn't feel overly restrictive in any way, particularly. Um, but yeah, I'm not. I'm a slightly picky eater, but I didn't particularly find it difficult there, to be quite honest. Um, yeah, there was always something. Um, so yeah, that's kind of it for the food. I don't really have much more to add. Um, but yeah, it was tasty. Yeah. I want to mention very briefly on the technique itself, because I'm sure some people will be curious about that. Um, I'm not going to go into detail particularly, because I don't want to. If you're going into the course, if you're about to start, I don't want to influence how you experience everything. I think if I knew how the technique develops over time, I would be thinking about that technique from day one. So I think it's important you go in blind, but it's not overly difficult or challenging. It's pretty standard meditation stuff. But the way it gradually develops day by day is quite nice. I will say, I'll tell you the first couple of days. The first day, very straightforward, as simple as it can get. You're sat there with your eyes closed, and you're simply observing the breath in and out of your nostrils. That's all you're doing. You're sat there doing that. And if you've never meditated, that will sound exhausting doing that for, 6, 7 hours a day. However, it's you get used to it. Everyone I spoke to managed to get used to it and adjust to it, and you do kind of get into a rhythm. Being away from your phone and just the world as a whole, uh, it kind of revitalizes you actually, and I felt revitalized very quickly, and therefore it's easier to do those things that feel impossible in standard day-to-day life. Sitting there for 6 hours a day, if I when I go home after this, I would not be able to sit there for 6 hours. It's just impossible. Um, but when you're there, those things are a lot easier. I assure you of that. But yeah, the first day you're just observing the breath in and out of your nose. The second day, you're doing the same thing, but you're consciously observing the sensation of the breath on your skin, so just underneath your nostrils and kind of going into your nostrils. And you have to kind of feel the sensation of the breath, essentially, if that makes sense. So very slight kind of development and change. And that's all I'm going to say on it. It develops, and as you go on, more days it includes more of your body. But hello, Robin. But generally speaking, um, it develops pretty gradually, and it's not overly challenging. I want to say one last thing quickly, and that's on a packing list. When you sign up, they send you a pretty extensive and strict packing list of what to include. The most notable things are kind of bedding, covers, and pillowcases and things like that, which is for a single bed, of course, which I did bring. They did actually offer it at the center if you needed it. They had spares. So it's not the end of the world if you forget it or for whatever reason can't have it. I presume that would be the same case at most centers. Maybe double check with them first. But yeah, I would recommend bringing a spare blanket. So as well as the kind of duvet kind of comforter that they give you, and then a pillow, they will also give you a blanket or two, and you can obviously request more if you like. I just liked having my own one. I'm very glad I brought one. And yeah, that was kind of well worth it as well. I definitely recommend doing that, especially if it's in the winter when it's a bit colder. Um, Alarm clock I mentioned. Watch, absolutely make sure you bring a watch, because otherwise it will just be impossible to track what time it is. Um, yeah, highly recommend that. You are making a mistake if you don't do that. Same case for a water bottle, completely essential. They had a water fountain there, which everyone frequented, of course. Yeah, if you don't have a bottle, you're really stuck, especially kind of in the meditation hall. Um, yeah, I would also recommend avoiding bringing any distracting objects, and by that I mean things that kind of remind you of home. In my specific case, it was I brought a water bottle with me that I'd gotten from work, and therefore every time I looked at that water bottle, I would think about work, and that wasn't very helpful, as you can imagine, because it would just be a general distraction in the day. However, I would caveat that, and it's like my blanket obviously reminded me of home, and that wasn't an issue necessarily in my bedroom. But yeah, just be a little bit conscious about that because you want to kind of avoid distraction as much as possible because you want to fully commit to the experience. Um, but yeah, again, I said I want to keep this video objective, and that's kind of the general overview of everything I wanted to discuss. I will finally say that after the course ended, I spoke to a lot of the other students actually, and there were a few interesting trends. The first was that every person I spoke to, including myself, were kind of at a stage of transition in life in one way or another. They just kind of exited a relationship, or they're between jobs, or they're about to go traveling, or this or that, or whatever it may be. I thought that was interesting. And it does make sense because generally, if you're willing to commit 12 days to something like that, if you're working a standard job, if you're uh, limited on time, you probably want to spend that time on a vacation, right? Or you want to go away, you want to do something, and it might feel a little bit like a waste using your valuable holidays on an experience like this. And that's kind of the position I was in, I suppose. However, I think although this isn't a holiday, it's not entirely peaceful, it's not without stress, you do have to confront things. Um, it's absolutely worth finding the time. Like, really do find the time. Um, Emotionally, a lot of people, pretty much everyone I spoke to, considered going home one time or another. Um, and that is definitely the biggest kind of challenge of the experience as a whole. Personally, to be very honest, I didn't struggle with that too much. But university, everyone else seemed to, which is, absolutely understandable, of course, because it can be quite tiresome and challenging, and of course difficult being away from home for that many days with literally no contact to the outside world. So that's a challenge in itself, of course. Um, I would caveat there's never going to be a perfect time to go to something like this. Um, and yeah, it is a little bit difficult to decide when the time is right, but yeah, there is no right time ultimately. Um, there is a kind of concern that you want to be a decent level of emotionally stable going into this. I would say that's very important and something I feel um, really important that it's really important that I mention that, because there's no mental health support there. No one is mental health trained. The course managers aren't mental health trained. The teacher isn't mental health trained. So if you did have a really horrific experience and spending 10 days in silence, meditating, you do start to this is a very common experience to start having memories or flashbacks. And if you have kind of deep rooted traumas or PTSD or anything like that, there is absolutely a risk there. So it's something worth keeping in mind and noting with your doctor if necessary. Yeah, definitely uh, don't go into this naively. Um, there were kind of situations. Sorry, there's a mosquito. There were kind of situations where I heard about people that did struggle to stay there, and they went to the teacher, and it wasn't overly helpful with what they said, which isn't necessarily surprising. So it's just something worth highlighting. Like I don't think if you're in kind of a manic episode or you're in a depressive period, I would not advise this. And there are stories I read of people going into kind of a state of psychosis, going into retreats like this. So, obviously, I'm not a medical expert myself. I think you should seek advice from a doctor if you're considering this, but you're not sure about this element specifically. Um, Proceed with caution. That's all I'm saying. There's not an inherent risk, but for some people, there might be. So yeah, just to kind of summarize about my experience. Again, I wanted to keep this quite objective, as I said, um, but again, I want to explain a little bit as to why I encourage people to do this so strongly. Um, there was another trend amongst the other students I spoke to, and it's every single person I spoke to had some kind of significant experience while at the retreat. Some realization, some kind of out of body feeling or experience. And I'm not going to kind of discuss what I experience now, but I had multiple moments like that throughout, which again, I had no expectation of anything like that going in. And it's interesting because the technique is somewhat scientific. However, they do sway into like a pseudoscience, overly spiritual realm sometimes when the teacher Goenka is explaining things, and I did kind of roll my eyes at times. However, I definitely had experiences as someone who isn't spiritual. I had experiences I can only describe as spiritual, to be quite honest, and a lot of people had similar experiences, and that was very surreal, and it made me question, my own um, spirituality, I suppose, in a way. And that was super significant and an incredible experience. Um, so yeah, that was incredible. Um, and the other thing I experienced is that even just after being away from my phone and the noise of the world and the news and just my kind of friendships and relationships and family and commitments in life, as soon as I was away from those and I could truly focus on myself, I felt like a different person. And on my second day there, it was only the second day, I felt such a clarity of thought. And I was feeling so like I was the most creative I had been since I was a child. And it was unbelievable, surreal. I'd never felt such a strong, intrinsic sense of confidence and motivation. Um, and again, I'm not saying that's going to be the same for everyone else that attends, but this was my experience going in with absolutely no expectation. And yeah, I was just shocked by it. And I don't know when or if I would return again, but 2 months have passed now, and I'm still carrying a lot of the benefits that I experienced directly from the retreat. Um, so, therefore, I've been recommending it to everyone. And again, taking in mind the caveats I mentioned, I still do really strongly believe this is kind of a bucket list experience that everybody should experience at one point in their life or another. It's not a gimmick. Um, and I say that with a lot of conviction. It's something worth experiencing. Um, but yeah, I hope if you've listened all this way, this has been helpful. If you're considering going, do it. Again, just ensuring you're safe and speak to a doctor if needed. Um, if you've already booked on and you're feeling a bit nervous, that's completely normal. Every single other person is feeling the same way. It's only natural. But I assure you, you won't regret it. Try to commit to the end. Again, you can leave, obviously. I've read things online where they say, "Oh, you're not allowed to leave," blah blah blah, whatever. The if you request to leave, the assistant teacher will speak to you, and they'll just want to understand why, and they'll try and help to support you essentially. And you know, if there was some in particular thing you were finding difficult, they'd try and fix that. But if they can see you're really emotionally struggling, you know, of course they'll help you leave. In fact, they'll even the course would if you arrive by public transport, you could request a ride to the centre. If you call up the centre, someone will come and get you. And the same thing if you wanted to leave. I heard about people that you know, they would essentially get driven to the nearest bus stop or station or whatever it may be. So it's not as if you can't leave if you do find it too difficult. But I do definitely think it's worth pushing yourself to stay on till the final day. Because yeah, it's a transformative experience, and I really do recommend it. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them below. I'll try and answer as many as possible. Um, but yeah, thank you so much for listening, and peace and love.